Welcome, everyone. Pleased to have you here with us today for this late summer edition of OpenAir's This Is CDR. This Is CDR is an online event series presented by OpenAir to explore the range of carbon dioxide removal solutions currently being researched, developed, and deployed, and to contextualize them for policy proposals we're working on advancing in local, national, and other jurisdictions worldwide. If you haven't done so already, please introduce yourself in the chat and tell us where you're zooming in from. My name's Toby Bryce. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York, and I work on CDR policy advocacy and market development with OpenAir. Just some quick background on OpenAir. We're a distributed volunteer network dedicated to the advancement of carbon removal solutions that are essential to solving the climate crisis. We're a growing global community, and we work together on shared open source missions in the areas of policy advocacy, research and development, and activist CDR market development. There should be a link in the chat to join us. We organize ourselves and communicate on Discord, and that's how we plan our projects and get things done. And we have a lot of things going on, and would love to have you be a part of what we're doing. Just some quick background on what we mean when we say CDR before we get started. It's important to define our terms here. This definition is from the Carbon Dioxide Removal Primer, which is a great resource for learning about CDR. But CDR is purposeful human activity to remove CO2 from the atmosphere and durably store it in geological, terrestrial, or ocean reservoirs, or in long-lived products. Two things that are really important to talk about when we talk about CDR. Number one is to disambiguate carbon removal from what is commonly called carbon capture, often conflated in the media and elsewhere, but carbon capture is typically capturing CO2 from an emission source, like a cement plant or a natural gas power plant. That is a form of emissions reduction, and it may or may not be a good climate solution depending on the situation, but what it definitely is not is carbon removal, which again is removing CO2 from the atmosphere and then durably storing it, removing it from the atmosphere and storing it in the geosphere, one way or another. The second thing about carbon removal that's really important to point out up front is that carbon removal is in no way, shape, or form a substitute for reducing emissions. We have to reduce global emissions and decarbonize our economy as quickly and as completely as possible, full stop. That said, there is clear scientific consensus expressed most recently in the IPCC AR6 Working Group 3 report that CDR will be required at gigaton scale by mid-century. That's billions of tons per year to counteract the emission sources that are impossible or inequitable to abate in a climate relevant time frame, for example, agriculture. So we are going to need to remove billions of tons of CO2 from the atmosphere by mid-century. Our current scale is kiloton. We're removing tens of thousands of tons of CO2 from the atmosphere. So we have a lot of work to do to scale up between now and mid-century. And we need to do this work now because gigatons scale capacity is not going to magically manifest in 2049 when we need it. So we need to start building this capability now. Lots of resources we'll be putting in the chat that you can check out to learn more about carbon removal. The series is a great resource. We've run over 45 episodes, I think, and covered all sorts of different carbon removal methods and policy and environmental justice and equity. So check that out. And then Chris Neidl, who is OpenAir's founder and running the chat, will put some other resources in there. And today we're going to learn about a really interesting CDR method from Australia. And I'm going to hand things over to my colleague, Megha Raghavan, who is going to introduce today's session and talk a bit about run-of-show.
Hey everyone, I'm Megha. I'm an OpenAir member based in London, and I work on policy advocacy opportunities out in the US where I'm from. So the usual housekeeping notes, our format is going to be a quick presentation followed by a few prepared questions and then moderated audience Q&A. So if you have any questions for the presenters, put them into the Zoom Q&A box. That's separate from the chat box, so make sure you find the one labeled Q&A to help us organize the questions a little more easily. The event is being recorded, so we'll send the video link out to everyone who registered, and we'll also post it to OpenAir's website and YouTube channel. This week on This Is CDR, we're very pleased to welcome InterEarth founders Howard Carr and Simon Avenell to tell us about the company's novel method of CDR by sustainably cultivating native wood biomass and securely burying it in saline aquifers on degraded lands in Western Australia. Dr. Howard Carr is InterEarth's inventor, founding CEO, and deep technical expert, geochemist and economic geologist, extensive experience in the resources and agriculture industry. He's also held roles as the CEO of mid-cap mining companies in Australia and in Canada. Dr. Simon Avenell is the co-founder of InterEarth and strategy and investor relations lead. He's an economist and has had careers as an academic and in consulting, former PwC partner with extensive experience in building and leading diverse teams to solve complex problems. So presenters, when you're ready, the floor is yours.
We're on. So I'm going to share my screen so that we've got some audio visual support.
Greetings, everybody.
So we've got a plan, you'll be pleased to hear. So firstly, we're going to give you an outline of what we have in mind, then give you a status update, then talk about what we like about our solution, and finally get into the questions and discussion. And that's the part we're really looking forward to, in fact. But before we do that, Toby's asked us to give a bit of an origin story. How did we get here? What are the drivers for our thinking, and why are we so passionate about this solution? And given Howard's the inventor, Howard, can you give us the background on how we got here, mate?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Simon. I guess it started when I was at the West Australian Department of Agriculture, close to 20 years ago. The Minister for Agriculture was seeking, innovative potential solutions or different thoughts on a change of land use for this marginal eastern wheat belt country that had suffered maybe the third drought in a row and crop failures. And so they were looking for some sort of out there ideas about what else we could do instead of just growing wheat. So that sort of was the start of the thought process. This particular plan didn't come to me straight away, but being a geochemist, I'd worked on many different projects on mineral processing and other things. And in that program, I started to sort of review the physicochemical and thermodynamic fundamentals of the core processes in direct air capture, chemistry, and the systems that could be employed. And I felt there was some pretty good, pretty large technical challenges to be addressed in those systems. The next part of development was the realization that photosynthesis is actually a very powerful mechanism, taking the energy from the sun and using this dilute 400 parts per million or so carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to produce carbon-based long-chain polymers in plants. And it's a pretty efficient system. And I guess the next part of that is that, like many natural systems that are in use today, that with some human-induced input to optimize the system, that maybe we could improve the performance of that natural system to be solely a CDR solution. And those improvements are around increasing the yield, increasing the survival rate, increasing the carbon dioxide uptake in the plants, as well as the post growing system of harvesting and then ultimately storing the biomass to ensure A, it doesn't burn, and B, that it doesn't decay and return the carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. So it was a sort of evolution of ideas and situations along that path. The actual commercial development then obviously accelerated as the climate crisis heightened, and we managed to get to where we are today with very kind investment from our founding investors.
Thanks, Howard. The core of our solution is very simple. So we think we're onto something that might be a game changer for CDR, and we'll come to what we like about our solution in a moment. But it's we are a different kind of carbon removal business. People are quite often a little taken aback when they first hear this thinking. So basically, the solution is to plant coppicing native trees on marginal freehold farmland already degraded and may well be right on the cusp or have already fallen out of productive use. So we let those trees grow, we harvest them of their above ground biomass, probably 3 to 4 to 5 years after they're planted. Then we store that biomass in some form of fireproof vault. And in fact, we're trialing 3 different solutions at the moment. Then we let those trees regrow, just deploying their coppicing characteristic. When that biomass is regrown, we harvest the trees again, and we store that biomass in the vault. And we repeat, basically creating a carbon pump. And as Howard says, we're basically optimizing the natural system here. The core is photosynthesis, but with support, with a bit of support from us, we can generate this system that we can run this carbon pump for as long as is required. So all of this is made possible by selling carbon removal certificates. This is a genuinely net negative solution and requires carbon finance. It's not a plant and forget scheme. We're actually going to be farming these trees. It's like an active farming activity. And in fact, we've got consultation in the local farming community. We're running a trial in the next couple of days. And so there's going to be regular harvests, regular use of fertilizer, regular weed control, regular pest control. So we're going to be actively managing this plantation with the objective of producing as much carbon dioxide removal as possible. On the fertilizer point, it's important to note that we are deploying fertilizer at a much, much lower rate than the current land use. How can you describe the transition, the different kind of land use that we're talking about here compared with the current land use?
Sure, Simon. Yeah, look, the current land use is, broadacre cereal farming, cereal production, dominantly wheat, but other cereals, barley, oats, canola sort of stuff. The rainfall's around 310 millimetres of rainfall a year, very high evaporation, around 2.5 metres of evaporation. And I think importantly, climate change is starting to impact, or not just starting to, has been impacting on the production risk in this area for some time. It's getting less rainfall, more gaps between the rainfall events, and cereal production is getting more and more difficult and requiring more technological inputs to make it viable. These areas are also, the furthest from the ports, so all of the imports have to be hauled at least 300 kilometres from the coast for the farming operation. Then in turn, all the produce has to be hauled the same distance back to the coast. So the system, it is a technological marvel that even works. But it is around, one of the lowest fertilizer utilization efficiency systems in the world, and very energy intensive, and prone to failure. So that's the current situation. What we're doing is transforming that cleared land really sort of back to a managed version of what was there originally, a multi-species native tree woodland, tapping into the synergies between the native plants, where the eucalypts, which are good biomass producers, live close proximity to acacias, which are another native plant, wattles, what we call them. They're leguminous, they produce nitrogen, and the woodland is highly productive, drought resistant, temperature resistant, pest and disease resistant, and given it's evolved here over millions of years, it's well adapted to the local landform. I think the other important part that we'll touch upon is the nutrient recycling issues, and these plants have grown in these very poor soils, or adapted to these very poor soils. So the phosphate and potassium requirements of these plants is very low, given that it's inherently low in these soils, and of course the nitrogen I've touched upon via the atmospheric fixing from the mixture of acacias. So we transformed the landscape sort of pretty much back to what it looks like, except they're planted in rows to allow for harvesting. We have a much more productive, a much more biomass productive system than previously, with a significantly decreased risk profile.
Thanks, mate. So right now we're just a startup, of course. So as Howard's pointed out, we have raised some money, and we're currently evaluating 3 different storage options. We're prototyping our harvester, and we're planning right now a 400 hectare demonstration planting in our initial target area. In fact, just adjacent to our initial target area. So just to highlight what we're talking about, the target area here. So this is the most eastern part of the central West Australian wheat belt. And this is the country that probably should never have been cleared in the first place. And it's an area of 2.2 million hectares, as you can see on the slide. That's equivalent to the area of Wales or the state of New Jersey in the USA, with a population of less than 2,500 people. In fact, populations have been declining steadily in the wheat belt since the Second World War, as a requirement for increasing scale has gone up. So if we can prove that all these parts can work, and we can prove that we can make money, you might see more of us in the future as we start to scale up. But as I say, we're just a startup. We're trying to prove this system out at this stage.
I guess what Simon's put there we put there what you see on the screen are key milestones for our development. We'll talk a little bit more about the storage options in a minute, and I note in the introduction that the emphasis historically has been on the burial of the biomass in a subterranean chamber with a hypersaline near surface groundwater, and that's a system that we have a great deal of faith in. However, in recent times we've moved to a new and improved system where there's an above ground burial stack that's similarly buried, but doesn't require the logistics and construction challenges of digging a chamber in this salt-affected terrain into a hypersaline near-surface aquifer. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But I think an important part is point number 2, the harvester. And this is a materials handling exercise. There's millions of tons of biomass that we seek to remove from the growing woodland, planted woodland. And at present, there isn't a machine that you can mass harvest trees efficiently and effectively to to remove that biomass for our storage solutions. So prototyping the harvester is a big technical step towards the practical achievement of our ambitions. And of course, the 400 hectare demo is bringing all of that together. That's the the land preparation, the planting, the high rate of planting in a narrow planting window, of course, the harvester itself and the storage solution as well. Simon, you might like to touch on our advances, which I said we haven't got there with respect to the methodology.
No, we that's right. We have well, the Puro spoke on this channel previously, and yes, we've got the methodology in place for biomass, woody biomass burial.
Yeah, so we've partnered with Puro.earth, the very innovative and forward-looking chaps out of Finland, with a recent American connection, and worked with them cooperatively to develop a new biomass burial methodology. And we're very happy that we've got to this stage. We now need some hard data to feed into that methodology, but in essence, it's a measurement-based methodology. So the biomass is weighed, total organic carbon is measured before it goes into the storage system, and then there's a series of measurement events to establish the carbon content of the stored biomass over time, to construct the decay curve of the carbon in the storage facility. And like all decay curves for isotopic systems and other biological systems, that if we can accurately define the mathematics of that decay curve, we can all agree on the asymptote of that decay curve. And our logic is everything below the asymptote is inert and eligible for the claim of long-term durability and premium CDR.
So to get to the things that we like about our own solution, and this is a little self-congratulatory, of course, we think it's important that our solution is both simple and understandable. It actually makes it a relatively easy concept to sell. Everyone can be an expert, we think, in our thinking here. It's practical. It's a very hands-on, dirt under your fingernails farming solution. It's actionable. It's something that we can get onto right away. And, in many ways, we see ourselves as probably a bridge getting on to CDR now, while other solutions will eventually come on stream and probably overtake us. But for the time being, we need to start getting CO2 out of the atmosphere at scale as fast as possible. And that's somewhere we may be able to step in the interim. We've consistently focused on costs. Our solution is relatively affordable. It's highly scalable. The little chart on the right there shows the 275 to 375 millimetre rain band with the climatic types where our solution, where the plants that we have in mind will thrive. So there is a global potential for the solution, and it can probably make a difference potentially at a gigaton scale. There are also great co-benefits for this scheme. Some of them are environmental, some of them are social. We can talk about those later. But the central role for measurement, how it's touched on here, this is a data-driven solution. No tricky modelling, no guesswork, no smoke and mirrors, measurable and manageable and verifiable at every stage is the way we like to think about our solution. That's something that makes us very comfortable. So shall we move on to the questions?
Surely. Thank you both so much for that presentation, and very exciting to learn more about about what InterEarth is doing. And thank you for addressing our typical first question about where this idea came from and how you started working on it. I'm going to audible a tiny bit on 2 points. Can you talk a little bit, just give us a sense of kind of your form factor from a carbon removal perspective? You talked about a 400 hectare demo planting, just based on some set of units, like 100 hectares. Like, so if you have 100 hectares of biomass capture, base capture, or 400 or whatever the right metric is, how much will that capture over time? And then how much land area do you need to sequester it? I would have said bury, but it sounds like you're not exclusively focused on burial anymore.
Okay, no. Well, we're still burying. It's just that burying can include placing dirt over a stack on the surface. So it still is burial, but we might not be in the deep earth moving business. You know?
Got it.
Yeah. So this system is, these plants are quite, miraculous plants. You know, in that given the harsh climate that we're targeting, the productivity is really quite amazing, and we've reviewed probably at least 35 years of government-funded, peer-reviewed trial data on the biomass productivity of thousands of different native Australian plants in these dry land conditions. And so we've gleaned that data for obviously the highest production species in different conditions. And we've liaised with a whole bunch of different foresters, some of the authors of those reports. So we make the claim that we can sequester around 12 tonnes of carbon dioxide per hectare per annum in our operating system. So if you want to use your 100 hectares, it's 1,200 hectares per hectare per annum. And so we've got our 400 hectares. There's a tree planting density. There's a lot of argument about precise tree planting density, but probably settle on around 600 plants per hectare. So we're looking at around 250,000 plants going into our 400 hectare site.
Got it. And then
sorry, Toby, the ratio for storage.
Yeah.
So the biomass is actually not very dense. It's quite dispersed. So from it's about 1 hectare per annum required for storage for 2,500 hectares for planting.
2,500. Okay, so that, yeah. So a hectare, so 2,500 times 12 is 10, 25. So 50,000 tons per hectare.
That's sort of number. That's correct. Yeah. So our stacks are like our routine stack that we plan is around 35,000 tons. And so, it's, a lot of people get focused on the requirement for the storage area, but it's really quite minimal. And these in an earlier slide where Simon showed the Google Earth image of our target area to the person with a really sharp eye, you might have seen a whole bunch of sort of white squiggles over the landform. And those are these salinated bottoms of the valleys that otherwise might have been freshwater streams before it was cleared and before the land was degraded from overclearing. So these bottoms of the valleys are these secondary salinated areas. Around about 6% of the total land mass that we're targeting has already been salinated. We need a ratio of 1 to 2,500, and we've got an abundance effectively of these salinated storage sites to choose from. Okay.
There's a question in the Q&A about breaking down your types of storage, and I will leave it for that and what you want to share about that. But just to recap, so 12 tons per hectare per year capture, and then 50,000 tons per hectare storage, or kind of ballpark land use metrics.
Cool. That's correct.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. My math.
Obviously variable with location,
Sure.
because as rainfall, if we went to higher rainfall zones, it'd be higher for them to live.
Yeah, it's good to have a rule of thumb just to understand. Okay.
Yeah.
So having spoken with people myself about the biomass burial in the past, the first thing people ask you about is, what about the methane? So what about the methane?
All right, the old methane. All right, so methanogenesis, is a common byproduct of biomass storage. It's what landfills are commonly. It's a byproduct of most landfills that have municipal waste in them. Stick some boreholes down, suck the methane off. It's a source of energy. Fantastic. But methanogenesis actually requires a couple of inputs. Obviously, it needs the biomass to start with, but it does need water, ideally reducing conditions, and ideally low, but a little bit of oxygen. So if you can remove those conditions, change the conditions of storage such that one or more of those requirements are not present, then methanogenesis is no different to oxidation or termite activity. It won't occur if you can break the pathway. So all of our storage is about doing that. So the first one, the saline pit, that I don't want to really talk too much about because, like I said, we've moved on. But there's many scientists around the world that we've communicated with in Australia and US, Europe, etc., that firmly believe that our hypersaline chamber is a really great solution. The point is that it's hypersaline. So this is sort of 5 times saltier than the sea. And it's the high salt content that creates the hostile environment for the microorganisms. We obviously also ensure that the conditions aren't reducing and that the oxygen levels are reduced to a minimum. But it's the hypersalinity that really pickles the biomass, no different to kimchi or pickled olives. That we all know that you go to the fridge, you eat the olives. There ain't no methanogenesis in the olive jar because you've got the right conditions. So that's effectively what we're trying to do with the saline chamber. And like I said, that's a great solution, but the logistics and operationality of digging holes on the edge of the salt-affected land, as we did for the trials, it's not impossible, but it is. It's a little bit like World War I trench warfare. It's a bit muddy and challenging. And that just adds to the cost. So how we came to the dry stack solution was, we're good scientists. In our trial, we had a control. Our control was just harvest the biomass and sun dry it in a ventilated site. And so it's the same biomass that we harvested for the chamber, but we just left it out in the sun, happily drying away for 65 days. Sampled that at the same time that we sampled the chamber through our trial, and we were astounded by the really remarkable preservation of carbon in the simply dried biomass. So we started doing more research on dried biomass, and it struck us that places like Notre Dame Cathedral, farmhouses all around the world have had their roof held up by, very nicely by dried timber that's held in a dry and well ventilated environment. So the wood itself is preserved, its tensile strength is maintained, and when you analyse that wood, the carbon content is like 99% on a dry basis, on a bone dry basis, of the fresh harvested wood. So we thought, wow, that's fantastic. So we've moved to the dry stack, where we take the dried biomass and keep it in a well-ventilated, dry environment, and we utilise the hypersaline terrain, the bottom of the valley, because in Western Australia we have very active termite population, or we call them white ants. They're voracious little eaters of biomass and take the place in the ecosystem largely of earthworms in a more temperate climates. So these guys are starting the whole biomass decay in the woodland. However, they don't like salt. So they can't handle any enhanced salt environment. And so we use the edge of the salt-affected land as effectively a biological termite barrier to stop the termite activity, and we stack the dry biomass up on a pad and keep it dry and well ventilated. And it's much easier, it's much simpler, much more cost effective, gives us greater site selection, quicker, less headache. And the results are even better, actually. And the final bit is it's easier to measure and monitor and to fix because everything's on the surface rather than being miners where we can go up and touch it and hug it.
Got it. Excellent. Thank you. Another concern when you talk to people about biomass burial, and this was expressed recently by Lower Carbon Capital and Lower Carbon Capital's CDR wish list that actually highlighted biomass burial and sequestration as a very promising CDR pathway that there's a lot of opportunity for. So you're well positioned. They are concerned about nutrient export, and he specifically, he mentioned nitrogen, which you mentioned, but he specifically cites phosphorus and also possibly iron and other nutrients. You mentioned this in your presentation, but it seems like maybe that issue is even more potentially pressing or concerning in a nutrient poor environment, in an environment that's already nutrient poor. So can you talk a little bit about that and like how that can be mitigated if we're pursuing a biomass sequestration method at scale?
No problems, mate. Okay. Look, I think we've got to come clean. Like nutrient, extraction from the soil and movement into the biomass is unavoidable. That's anyone who tries to tell you otherwise is dreaming. So it's a fundamental part of all agricultural production systems that the plants take nutrients out of the soil, and those nutrients in some form are in the plant biomass. So we can't completely eliminate nutrient removal from the soil. However, in the natural system in the woodland, there was a complete cycle of nutrients. Unfortunately, that required the decomposition of the biomass, and so you can have nutrient recycling, but you'll also have carbon dioxide recycling as well. So it's a double-edged sword that if you want to break down the biomass to access the nutrients, the carbon dioxide is going to be released. So what our whole strategy is to minimise the nutrient uptake and removal into the stack. So how do we do that? These plants have adapted over the last 20 odd million years to these very infertile soils. So their P and K requirements are extremely low, among the lowest in the world. In fact, if you go to our local hardware store or plant shop in Western Australia, it's actually very difficult to buy a fertilizer with phosphate in it because the phosphate is almost a poison to the native plants. So this shows how well adapted these plants are to these low nutrient environments. So if you're going to use a plant, the local plants, the endemic plants are a great place to start. Then what we've touched upon with respect to the nitrogen, all plants need nitrogen, but these are low protein plants. This isn't soybeans or corn that require high nutrients to make proteins for animal consumption or human consumption. So we're just targeting straight out long chain polymers, which from an animal perspective or a fodder perspective would be very, very low value. However, the carbon is still preserved in the lignin, hemicellulose, etc. So selecting the right plants that are adapted to these low fertility soils for the P and the K, the N. the acacias, the wattles, we're scientists, sort of businessmen. We didn't come to this solution via a sort of biodynamic, ideological bent. We came to this because just so happens that nature's worked out a pretty good system. That system is that the acacias form the understory to the woodlands. The acacias suck the carbon dioxide, suck nitrogen out of the atmosphere and make soluble nitrates for the eucalypts to uptake. So we're imitating the natural system because it works really good, and we think that that's the best of an unavoidable situation that many people have asked us about. And we think that that the combination of all of these bits means that the impact on nutrient depletion in the soils is minimal. I think there's one final bit that I can see Simon's about to remind me, and that is that our business plan is to run this planting and harvesting for 25 years. At the end of the 25 years of our model, it's our plan to return the plantation to a natural woodland. So unfortunately for the hardcore ideologists, it'll be in rows, but over time those rows will fill in. But it will return to a natural woodland where the biomass can fall to the ground, decay, release the carbon dioxide, be in equilibrium, and the nutrients will be recycled. What's in the stack, of course, stays in the stack.
Got it. One last question, maybe briefly, because you did touch on it in your presentation, but whenever we talk to folks about CDR, we think it's really important to talk about how a given CDR method or project or company is going to proactively consider and address equity and environmental justice issues. We're all trying to do good here, but you're building plantations, and plantations don't have the greatest track record historically of taking care of neighboring communities and taking care of the land. So can you briefly just talk a little bit about your company ethic in that regard and how you plan to maybe hopefully do better than the palm oil industry, for example?
So what I'll do is maybe I'll just start with a little bit of my background, and then I'll flip the back half to you.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
All right. So I'm from a farming family from the Target area, fifth generation wheat growing family from the northern wheat belt of Western Australia, and I think it's fair to say that we have a pretty deep understanding of the sociology and geography of the environment. Having worked for the Department of Agriculture and others, driven tractors, driven headers, combine harvesters for all of my youth, and seeing the towns that I grew up in decline at 2% per annum, services declining. When you've lived through a couple of recurrent droughts and the financial and social stress of that on the community, I think I'm pretty well versed in how the local community think and what cranks their handle. Our main points are economic diversity, spending money in the community, creating new jobs, and we're up there engaging with the community right now. And Simon can say a bit more about that.
Yeah, and there's also, when you say plantation, I think some people have a vision of the antebellum South in the US. That what we're talking about here are super efficient farming settings where the population density is incredibly low. So in our part, in the areas we're talking about, the farmer is the landowner. There isn't a farming workforce. Basically, a 10,000 or 15,000 hectare spread will be run by one family with minimal labour support. We're actually going to need to pull in more workers into these communities because our process moves more material. There's more tasks on site. It's it'll be a all year round operation, and so we're going to be transformative for these communities in a way in bringing in more people.
And I think, like a lot of people, every time you hear there's a new development going on in any community, it's going to be more jobs, mate. It's going to be more jobs. Everybody says it. But, often these are low quality and transient jobs. We make the claim there's more jobs because the current biomass production under the wheat system is 1.2 tonnes per hectare per annum. Our above ground biomass is like 10 tonnes per hectare per annum. So we've got 7 times more material to move. And no matter how big the truck is, no matter how big the front end loader, you need more people to move the material. And we make that, we haven't done a detailed analysis on the jobs, but we say there will be more jobs because there's more material to be moved. And the local community get that. Another important part about our system is that it all stays local, that unlike, say, growing wheat that ends up, turned into bread in Europe or udon noodles in Asia, this all stays local. We grow the trees, we harvest the trees, we stack the trees. There isn't any, it's very energy efficient. There's no cross ocean transportation. There's no carbon dioxide emissions around the world. And the value add stays local. So we're engaging with the local community. In fact, tomorrow we've got three local community engagement sessions, including a small barbecue and some beers to engage with the community. And everybody, you'd be
surprised to hear.
Everybody is very, very supportive. And it's that economic diversity. Currently, it's wheat. So if the price of wheat goes down and or the harvest is poor, there isn't any other option. That's it. Everyone is very sad. Yep. But in our situation,
I'm glad you guys are addressing this proactively and Australian style with beers and barbecue but it's seriously.
Well, it is
actually.
It's
good that you're thinking about this. But I want to hand it over to Mega to get some of these audience questions because we have a bunch and we only have a few more minutes.
Sweet.
Yeah. So the first question we got was, can you just talk a little bit about the core differences between the 3 volt types that you're evaluating and kind of pros and cons there?
All right. Sorry, there was a little bit of a gap there in the. I think you're talking about the storage systems.
Yeah, the 3 volt type.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I've touched on the saline brine. Dig a chamber, bury it, keep the oxygen out, flood it with hypersaline brine. Hypersaline brine is so toxic that nothing can live. The dry stack, dry the biomass, stick it on top of a pad on the edge of the hypersaline affected land. Keep the biomass dry, keep it well ventilated. Utilise the hypersaline groundwater as a barrier to termite infestation. So.
And the third one's another burial solution where we just put the green biomass straight in the chamber underground.
And so that sort of mimics what other people are talking about of wrapping the biomass in plastic. So we're a bit of a, we don't use any plastic in our system to create any sort of oxygen ingress barrier or for any other purpose. So we're a big advocate of optimal compaction of high clay content soil. So we're a part of our land selection criteria is the right sort of soil. So we do quite a bit of soil testing for hydraulic conductivity. And so we only select soils for the chambers and the burial that can be compacted to, exceed US EPA specs on an aquiclude, which is roughly 10 to the minus 8 meters per second. So all of our soils are 10 to the minus 10, 10 to the minus 11 on the hydraulic conductivity. So that's sort of like between hot mix asphalt and reinforced concrete for hydraulic conductivity. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And particularly on the dry stack, is there any risk of fire with any of the biomass there, or how do you prevent against that?
Okay, so It is a good point. And that's a major advantage of our whole system is that we remove that fuel load out of the forest so that it can't burn, in the plantation. And that's a big risk for all perpetual forests is that they'll burn, especially with climate change and our dry climate. So yes, fire mitigation is critical. Take the dried biomass, or take the harvested biomass, put it out on the salt lake again and dry it. So on the salt lake, it's spread out like coffee beans sort of thing to access the sun. I guess there is some potential fire risk that it could burn on the salt lake, but of course, its moisture content for a fair part of that period will be quite high and not amenable to fire. But it is it would be a manageable situation that we could simply put that sort of fire out because it's open and exposed. Once the biomass is dry, we put it into the stack. It's completely covered. It is buried. It's a barrow. It's like Professor Zeng's above ground barrow. So it's completely covered in optimally compacted, high clay content soil, greater than 10 to the -8 hydraulic conductivity. It's completely encapsulated. It's just a mound above the surface. So fire risk 0.
Okay, got it. And then in terms of the sort of decay curves that you use, those are presumably based on empirical models. So what kind of studies and monitoring are you doing to establish what those decay curves are going to look like?
All right. Well, surprisingly enough, there's actually a dearth of good information in this area. Whilst it seems very logical, the tensile strength of timber has been measured over time to ensure that the roof doesn't fall in. Tensile strength is intimately related to the preservation of the lignin, hemicellulose, cellulose, the core components of the wood, and that by itself is the long chain polymers and the carbon store. So there's a link between tensile strength and carbon preservation, and so logically we understand, and probably even Neanderthals understood what we're talking about. But the actual hardcore total organic carbon content of wood over time, there's not a huge amount. Obviously we've collected everything in the public domain, but we're generating a pretty big database of our own data that for independent verification through Puro and others. So in our dry stack, we sample every 2 weeks. So we sample every 2 weeks from burial, and we continue sampling until the mathematics shows that the decay curve is defined within a plus 95% confidence level. So our initial sampling period is for 6 cycles of sampling on a 2-week basis, and the numbers, I can't tell you all of our confidential information, but it's amazingly high preservation in the high 90%, the high 95, above 95%, in fact, well above 95% preservation of the carbon that we capture from the atmosphere in our dry stack. So the results are really quite outstanding.
Okay. And then could you help us understand, like, what does a completed hectare of stacks actually look like? Is it, is there wildlife? Is it more of sort of a desert from an ecological point of view? What should we be picturing?
All right. So it's like I say, we imitate the natural woodland with its eucalypt canopy, its acacia understory, and even a ground cover made of common salt bush we called Atriplex. So at that point, 13 different species that we targeted. It sort of looks pretty much like the natural woodland. However, it is planted in rows, so that we've got materials handling corridors between the rows for removal and storage. So it looks like rows of the natural stuff. Okay. Wildlife, after the trees are established, after they're about 2 years of age, we got no problems with herbivores, kangaroos, emus. or any other form of wildlife living in the plantation. We do have a bit of a problem when we're trying to establish them, that herbivores won't be encouraged in the early stages. But once they're up and going, and our harvest is going to be a big, noisy, Dr. Zeus type machine, and the wildlife will hear us coming and move to an unharvested site. We're not establishing a national park. We're not establishing a biodiversity refuge. We're establishing a machine that efficiently sucks carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and locks it up in long-chain polymers. So there are significant biodiversity benefits, better than the current land use. Current land use is more or less a fauna and flora desert. Once the wheat's harvested, for the entire summer period, it's just like a big dry stalks as far as the eye can see, and so it's significantly better than what's there, but it's not our primary objective. It's one of those co-benefits we speak of,
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. I think we're getting close to the end of it. Oh, I think we have one more question actually. Have you thought about turning some of the biomass into biochar, and what would be the pros and cons of that?
Okay, look, you can burn it and combust it and make carbon neutral electricity. You can make biochar, no problems. Okay, so biochar, the pyrolysis process, everyone's talking on making the pyrolysis process more efficient, but the rule of thumb is greater than 50% of the total contained carbon is lost to the atmosphere in the pyrolysis process due to the heat source required to get the charcoal going, and then in the reformation process itself. So when we talk about in the very high 90% and above 95% carbon preservation in our stack, these numbers just greatly exceed what you can achieve with biochar. So if we can move from 50% carbon loss to 1% carbon loss in our system, that's from our very selfish perspective, that's money in our pocket. From the global perspective, that's carbon dioxide that's not returning to the atmosphere. So we hear the whole biochar thing. We welcome it. It's no problems, but we just think our system is carbon more beneficial, and of course, cost and operating expense more efficient as well.
Makes sense. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. This has been great. And Toby, I'm going to hand it back to you to close us out.
Howard and Simon, thank you so much. And if everyone's not aware, it is now 1 a.m. in Australia. So we are especially grateful for you taking such a late part of your evening to be with us here in the Northern Hemisphere, Western Hemisphere. But thanks again. It was really interesting and super exciting to learn about all of your progress and what's going on with InterEarth. And best of luck with your next steps.
Thank you very much, Toby.
Thanks, Toby. Thanks, Mega. Thank you very much, audience.
And yes, thank you all for such great questions. We had a lot of biomass and biomass burial experts in the audience, so we got some really good questions. A couple quick things. We've talked about this a couple times, but OpenAir is working on a summer citizen lobbying push to advance the Federal Carbon Dioxide Removal Leadership Act in the U.S. It's a federal bill to get the U.S. government to start procuring carbon removal at a very large scale, and it's a very important bill. And we've had a lot of good climate success here in U.S. politics, surprisingly, in recent months. And so hopefully we can get this over the line as well. So please, there should be a link in the chat where you can sign up for this project, but we would love to have you be a part of it. Basically, we provide the tools that you need to contact your local U.S. congressional reps to get them to ask them to support the bill. Next up on This Is CDR, we had a cancellation for next week, unfortunately, and we're going to go ahead and take a 2-week end of summer in the Northern Hemisphere break. And then we will be back strong in September. We have a bunch of great things coming up, so keep an eye on our Twitter. A couple of the Eventbrites are live, but we haven't published all of them yet, but in the next week or so we will. And so we have Travertine Ocean MRV with Jessica Cross from the NOAA in the US. Lithos, which is an innovative enhanced rock weathering carbon removal company, and a bunch of other exciting programs coming up. So thank you so much for being with us. Thanks for the great questions. Enjoy the rest of your Northern Hemisphere summers, and we will be back with you in a couple weeks. Be well, everyone, and take care.